Hello everyone, you're welcome to this episode of Freedom Friday on Luminera TV. Here we have conversations on freedom and how freedom is beneficial to everyone, and we delve into different dimensions of the very concept of freedom. Today I have with me an amazing person, an amazing young woman from Kenya. She's an international trade lawyer, and she's Linda Kavuka. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
It's nice to have you on this episode of Freedom Friday. So today we'll be having conversation on the concept of freedom and free trade. And my first question to you is this. A lot of time people have a different understanding of freedom, and this understanding of freedom can be somehow dicey. So how would you describe the very concept of freedom and what it means for everyone in terms of being able to do well as people, in terms of our livelihood and well-being?
Well, I'd like to define freedom in the simplest way that anyone would understand, because freedom is such a dense term. You can define it in a very broad way, different way, academic way, or it can be simple, but for us to be able to just understand the simple way, freedom is being able to make choices that affect your own private life without interference. So what does this mean? You have to put this into context to understand what it means. It means, like in simple terms, if you're in trading, you and I, if we're entering into a business engagement, it's for us to be allowed to enter into any deal, any agreement for the sale of a service or a good without intervention from any other third parties. Whether we succeed or not, whether we disagree or not, we should be able to do that within our own agreed terms, without third-party interference. And the third-party interference should be very limited, only to the extent that we allow. So the basis of our engagement is determined by our own agreement. So that's what just freedom means. So long as the choices that you're making are affecting your own private life and are not interfering with the enjoyment of another person's freedom. Some people like to think that when we advocate for freedom, we're advocating for anarchy, but then there is a limit.
Yes, I like that point you raised, anarchy, because a lot of times people feel that when you talk about freedom, that you're just free to do anything, any and everything. It's not always like that. Oftentimes freedom comes with responsibility. And then we also have in every society or where people live, there's what we call the rule of law, which of course guides how people interact and all of that. And you also made mention of agreements. So these are also kind of like legal dimensions to all of these in terms of having some things to regulate how people interact. But when we talk about free trade, which is like a dimension of freedom itself, like the economic dimension of freedom, how do you think, first of all, how can we understand free trade as a concept? Perhaps we should start with that.
We start with free trade.
Yeah.
So the nature of our existence is that we have been exchanging goods and services right from pre-colonial Africa. If you read our histories, you come to see communities that were how they lived and how they did their trading, their commerce, and their engagement with others. We have communities that used to be long distance travelers. Because they were trading, they would walk miles and miles and go and do barter trade. So the beginning of our people was we used to do barter trade, exchanging one good for another, or maybe a good for a service. Then this now has developed and metamorphosized into what we have today, our modern day. So free trade basically is people being allowed to exchange goods or services for value according to their own agreed terms, with limited interventions, without any trading barriers, and with limited intervention from third parties, mostly the government or maybe other authority. So that is generally what free trade
means. Now, when you look at Africa as a continent, or particularly Nigeria, you see a number of surveys that shows that a lot of people, especially young people, want to move out of the country or the continent. And I believe that this is largely due to the fact that opportunities are limited there, and there's limited freedom. And when you look at the countries that most people want to move to, you would realize that these are countries where there are more freedom. there is more freedom in most of these countries. A lot of people, even though China is doing very well, for example, in terms of economic freedom or trade and opportunities in terms of prosperity, a lot of young people wouldn't want to go to China, for example. They want to go to countries like Canada, Germany, US, and all that, where you see countries that rank very well in terms of overall human freedom. So, what's your take on this, and what do you think Nigerian government or African leaders, should be doing to stop this trend?
So, should they stop our people from leaving the continent?
I don't think so. People should have freedom of movement. People should be free to migrate to wherever they want to migrate to.
Now, unfortunately, Africa has, when it comes to first taxes, we have the highest taxes globally in the continent. And then secondly, regulations. We have very complex laws and bulky laws. Some that even the lawmakers themselves don't understand. They don't even know when it was passed and why. And when they're passing new or developing new models of law, they're forgetting that there are already existing laws that are in place. So then we have a kind of spaghetti ball when it comes to regulation. Sometimes even they're too complex and they're confusing. So these two things, taxes and too much regulation, means that our trading environment is hostile. Trading environment in the continent is very hostile in all our countries. So trading for us locals in Africa is very difficult. And most of us are forced to exist outside of the regulated spaces. And we have companies that are not in the government trader or registered or all this, not because we don't want to, but because becoming legal is at a very high cost. And at times even impossible. African economies, we come from a continent where we are called a poor continent because of the number of millions of poor in our continent, and also people who are able to generate income, the percentages of the unemployed. So a lot of us are running to SMEs and we have the MSMEs and SMEs. But then, because they're not able to formally set up, they end up in the informal sector.
So looking at all of these, how do you think we can increase freedom across the continent, especially young people? What should be our role? Because you would agree with me that freedom and prosperity are kind of connected. In societies where we see greater freedom, we also see greater well-being. So what do you think we can do as young people to push for greater freedom? Because we know it's beneficial.
Yeah. So this message is for us, advocates for freedom. First is to try and win more alliances. Get more people to join us to understand freedom and understand why we should be advocating for more free spaces and more freedom in our communities. Then the challenge for us now is how do we make our communities more free? Practically, how do we do this? We need to understand the systems. We need to understand our social mechanisms, how we are, how we think, our way of doing things, and engage the members of our communities in order to see where we lie and the gap. Then see how we fit in. How do we craft the message to be able to be received in our African setup? The ideas of freedom right now, you may argue that they are a bit elitist, and in their own raw form will not be accepted by the majority of our people. So you have to first understand them, absorb them, and then custom make it to fit in our local spaces. And indeed, like changing some of our practices, especially in our communities, to make it more free is a battle that we cannot win immediately. We can't do that. It's going to be a thing of generations. And even if you look at these countries that are free now, the United States, these are communities that have been free for years before we got our own independence. Isn't it? Yes. And even the way they developed, if you look at how US came about, Industrial Revolution and all that change, how the different people from different places went there, how they contributed to how it grew. So we have a long way to go to get to that level. However, we can learn from them, and we don't have to take as much time as they did to be able to be at the level of freedom that they have.
And I also believe we don't have to follow
their approach. We usually study, if you study our African history, people, when it comes to trade especially, people will say free trade is a new concept. We already practiced free trade here. If you look at our own traditional practices and how we used to do barter trade with each other. If you look at how our own communities were being ruled, the ruling systems and all that, we had a lot of freedom. And even those who were in leadership, like the chiefs, council of chiefs, chief elders, and the kings and the queens, they didn't just come up with rules and implement it and force it on people. They were not dictators, no. There were systems that they followed that enabled people to get public opinion. They had specific representatives, and these representatives had to be very careful when they came up with their own decisions that inform the kings or the chiefs and all that. So we need to understand our communities where we are. And then when we understand where we are, we need to now craft the message of freedom in a way that we'll be sure will be accepted. And then propose solutions that will work practically for our own local settings. And in this case, so what do? We are heavily dependent on the state. That's who we are. If you ask our people what the role of government is, we have a saying in Swahili, serikali ni mama na baba. Serikali is like the government is mother and father. Some people will say, politicians, there's some slogans they use, like the government is your mother and your father. Yeah. So this, while it's a slogan, it is something that was adopted, absorbed, and practiced by people, especially like in the rural areas. They believe that this government is it's like a demigod for them, the solution to each of their problems. So now, how do you engage with such people and this kind of thinking and get them to want and accept more freedom? So my proposal is, our starting point can be to lobby for more private-public partnerships. That's a place where we can start from. To already accept that the government is there and isn't going anywhere right now, but for us to try and lobby for more spaces for the private sector to enter into and get more opportunities to give services or goods and all that in our societies. In health especially, and education, those are top two. And the third one would be infrastructure. So if we're able to get more private-public partnerships in education, health, and infrastructure, I think those will have a huge impact in changing the face of the African states as we know them.
And I also think it will also be important for people to understand that from practical examples, that the private sector is a better manager of resources and especially infrastructure. Most times governments don't do very well in managing a lot of things, so private sector does better. So my last question to you will be focused on free trade, especially because we have an African continental free trade now. And when you look at the fact that Nigeria didn't sign this free trade agreement on time, as well as a few other countries, and also in terms of the ratification, one of the reasons that was given is that it will affect the local manufacturers and all of that. Now, are these valid reasons, or there are ways that we should look at things differently, especially talking about the benefits of this continental free trade area for everyone?
Indeed, competition is a very valid concern. And one thing that is happening right now, the creating of Africa's novel common market, which is through the AfTA agreement by the African Union, is a process of being done in phases. So at the moment, the protocol on sale of goods, sale of services, and dispute resolutions, those have been completed. And it's what people have been signing and ratifying. Okay. However, there are still some protocols that are pending and they are ongoing. Protocol on competition, protocol on intellectual property. And these two are now touching the heart of private sector, like the businesses. What is this? This is copyright issues of trademarks. I'm coming up with an invention and accompanying an invention here, and someone counterfeiting. So how do we stop this? Imagine now we're opening up a space. You will travel to Africa here and you will see some companies having names of American companies. We have them here locally, isn't it? Yes, and then because the Americans don't have the power or the legal capacity to come and follow us here on IP rights, we get away with it. But now, how are we going to address this when such things come up within the African continental free trade area, where people are infringing each other's intellectual property, or maybe even don't know that they're infringing intellectual properties of other companies? So competition is a big issue, and I think it's at the heart of operationalization of the AfTA, because it will determine how people are trading, and the event that there are disputes, how are they being handled. So the protocol currently is being developed. It is ongoing, hasn't yet been completed. So we don't know the contents, and it hasn't been finalized.
So overall, how do you think all of this is going to benefit the ordinary African in, say, in Sierra Leone or in Tanzania? How is it going to benefit the ordinary African?
I'm a heavy proponent of free trade. So wherever, I will always advocate for free trade. Why? For you, the common man, it means you have more customers for your product. You have a bigger market to sell to. Who doesn't want a bigger market? That's the goal of your business. And it means you're not limited to the space where you have created your company, whether it's your city or your country. You're now being given the chance of being an international company with more customers, with your products going across the borders, with you getting more partnerships and more alliances. And for someone who is creating something, doesn't it give you joy to see your product and your own invention being enjoyed in Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, when you're from Sierra Leone? To countries where you would never have thought of going, but the after is now opening up the space for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Linda, for all of the amazing contributions that you've brought to a better understanding of freedom for all of us. I believe people watching us must have learned a lot of things about freedom. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much, Linda, once again for being on this episode of Freedom Friday on Ominira TV. I believe you have learned one thing or the other. Freedom is the answer to some of the biggest problems in Africa. Like and comment, and you can subscribe to our YouTube page. Thank you very much.